Hey, what is up everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There is a saying, whispered in the corridors of power on 1,000 different worlds across the breadth of human civilization, that death can come from anywhere. From the poisoned cup raised in celebration, from the lover whose face shifts in the candlelight, from the empty rooftop 3 miles distant where nothing stirs but the wind, from the cold, soulless presence that makes your skin crawl before the darkness takes you. In the grim darkness of the far future, where humanity clings to survival against horrors beyond counting, this saying is not a metaphor. It is an operational doctrine, encoded in the founding charter of one of the most terrifying institutions ever conceived by the minds of men. It is the promise kept, across 10,000 years of unbroken service, by the agents of the Officio Assassinorum. Tonight, I want to take you somewhere you have probably never been before. Not to the front lines of a galaxy-spanning war, where space marines charge through fields of fire and Imperial Guard regiments hold the line against the darkness. Not to the bridge of a warship or the throne room of a planetary governor. I want to take you deeper, into the shadows, into the hidden temples and forgotten corridors where the Imperium forges its most terrible weapons, not from steel and ceramite, but from stolen children and broken souls. I want to show you what it truly means to be an Imperial assassin, from the moment your old life ends to the final breath you take in service to a god who will never know your name. Because here is the thing that most people never think about when they hear stories of the Officio Assassinorum. They hear about the impossible shots taken from miles away. They hear about the shapeshifter who wore the face of a trusted advisor for months before striking. They hear about the drug-crazed berserker who carved through an entire planetary government in a single night of blood and fire. And they think of power. They think of skill. They think of the ultimate expression of the Imperium's reach and the Emperor's wrath. What they rarely think about is the person underneath all of that. The child who was taken. The identity that was erased. The humanity that was systematically dismantled and rebuilt into something that could kill without hesitation, without remorse, and without ever being acknowledged for the sacrifice they made. The life of an Imperial assassin is not a life of glory. It is not a life of honor, and not in any way that a normal human being would recognize. It is a life of absolute dedication to a cause that demands everything you are and gives nothing back except the knowledge that somewhere, on some world you will never see, people are alive because you ended the right person at the right moment. It is a life measured in targets eliminated, in missions completed, in the silence that follows the final heartbeat of an enemy of the Imperium. And when it is over, when the assassin has given everything they have and there is nothing left to give, there is no retirement. There is no quiet cottage on a peaceful world. There is no family to return to, no friends to welcome you home. There is only the next mission or the grave. So settle in, get comfortable. Let me tell you a story about the most dangerous and most cursed individuals in the entire galaxy. Let me tell you about the men and women who serve as the Emperor's hidden blade, the silent executioners whose names are struck from every record and whose deeds are buried in vaults that will never be opened. Let me tell you about the Imperial assassins and the terrible price they pay for the privilege of keeping humanity alive. It all begins, as so many things in this galaxy do, with the Emperor of mankind. Long before the Imperium existed as we know it, long before the great fleets crossed the stars and the Space Marine legions brought world after world into compliance, there was Terra, old Earth, the cradle of humanity, torn apart by thousands of years of war, plague, and technological regression. The Emperor, that towering figure of golden light and unfathomable psychic power, had emerged from the shadows of history to unite the warring factions of humanity's homeworld. It was a project of breathtaking ambition, the Unification Wars, and it required every tool at the Emperor's disposal. Vast armies of genetically enhanced soldiers, the Thunder Warriors, served as his battering ram. Diplomat agents wove their way through the courts of petty tyrants and warlords, and in the deepest shadows, where the light of the emperor's vision could not reach directly, other servants moved with purpose. These were the proto-assassins, the earliest predecessors of what would eventually become the Officio Assassinorum. During the Unification Wars, these killers answered not to any bureaucrat or administrative body, but to the Ephoroi of the Adeptus Custodes, the emperor's own personal guardians. Their task was straightforward in concept, but endlessly complex in execution. Where the Thunder Warriors could not reach, where diplomacy had failed, where the cost of open war was too high, these shadows would slip through the cracks in an enemy's defenses and remove the obstacle with a blade, a poison, or a well-placed round. They were effective, terrifyingly effective. And the emperor saw their value, even as he recognized the moral weight of what they represented. But it was not the emperor who would formally establish the Officio Assassinorum as an institution. That task fell to his most trusted confidant, the man who stood at his right hand through the darkest days of the Unification Wars and the glory of the Great Crusade that followed. His name was Malcador the Sigillite, the Regent of Terror, and he would become the first Grand Master of Assassins. Malcador understood something that the Emperor, with his godlike perspective, could sometimes overlook. He understood that the enemies of humanity would not always present themselves on open battlefields. Some would hide, some would scheme in the shadows, building conspiracies and alliances that could undermine everything the Emperor was building. And to fight those enemies, you needed warriors who could operate in those same shadows, who could match cunning with cunning and treachery with lethal precision. And so, in secret, Malcador convened a meeting that would change the course of human history. On the slopes of Mount Vengeance, a peak on Terra, whose exact location has been purged from every navigational record in existence, and 7 figures gathered under a sky heavy with the smoke of a world still healing from its wars. All 7 were masked. Their identities were hidden from one another, and for good reason. What they were about to create was too dangerous, too powerful, to allow any single person to know all of its secrets. Of the 7, 6 were individuals of extraordinary talent, each representing a distinct philosophy of killing, a unique approach to the art of ending a life. The 7th was their leader, and none of them knew that behind his mask stood Malcador himself. These 6 individuals became the founding directors primus of the assassin clades, the original temples from which every Imperial assassin would eventually descend. Sire Vindicare, whose name would become synonymous with patience and the perfect shot. Sire Eversor, whose legacy would be written in blood and fire. Sire Culexus, born with the terrifying gift of psychic nullity. Sire Vanus, whose weapon was not the blade or the bullet, but information itself. Sire Venom, whose mastery of poisons could kill without leaving the slightest trace. And Sire Callidus, who could become anyone, wearing another's face as easily as you or I might wear a hat. Together, they swore a pact. They would hunt the enemies of the Emperor by stealth and subterfuge, showing these foes that there was no place in the galaxy where they could hide from the Emperor's justice. And they would do so in absolute secrecy, their existence known only to the most powerful individuals in the nascent Imperium. For decades, the 6 clades operated in the shadows of the Great Crusade, removing obstacles that the Space Marine legions and the Imperial army could not or would not address directly. A planetary governor who secretly worshipped forbidden powers would choke on his own blood at a state dinner, and no one would ever know why. A warlord who had rallied a coalition against the approaching crusade fleets would be found dead in his own fortress, killed by a weapon no one could identify. A demagogue whose words threatened to undo months of careful diplomacy would simply vanish, as if he had never existed at all. The assassins were ghosts, and the galaxy was their hunting ground. In time, these founding members realized that they could not hide their existence forever. Their skills had to be passed on. New agents had to be trained, and so, reluctantly, they revealed themselves to the Emperor. Well, the accounts of this moment vary depending on which source you consult. but the most commonly accepted version says that the emperor looked upon his assassins with sorrow. He saw the necessity of their existence, understood the terrible duty they had taken upon themselves, and he was pleased by their loyalty and dedication. But there was a sadness in his acknowledgement, a recognition that the galaxy he was trying to build required instruments of death as much as it required instruments of creation. Great temples were constructed, hidden away in secret locations across Terra, and eventually across the galaxy itself. The most skillful and deadly youths were sought out from across the Imperium's growing domain and brought to these temples for training, and the strongest survived. Many did not. The training of an Imperial assassin is not designed to produce the greatest number of graduates. It is designed to produce perfection, and perfection has a body count. But those who emerged from the temple's doors were among the most lethal beings in the galaxy, human weapons honed to a razor's edge and pointed at whatever target the Emperor's servants deemed necessary. Thus was the Officio Assassinorum born, and the names of Callidus, Venom, Culexus, Vindicare, Eversor, and Vanus were forever immortalized in the secret histories of the Imperium. New skills were learned, and new refinements were made. The art of blade and pistol, poison and garrote were honed in every aspect conceivable, and the terrible work continued, day after day, year after year, millennium after millennium. An unbroken chain of death stretching from the earliest days of humanity's expansion to the present, where the galaxy burns and the enemies of mankind multiply without end. But to truly understand the curse of being an Imperial assassin, you have to go back to the very beginning of an assassin's story. Not to the founding of the Officio, not to the political machinations of the High Lords of Terra, not even to the moment when the mission scroll is unsealed and the target's name is revealed. You have to go back further than all of that. You have to go back to the day when a child, usually no older than 6 or 7 standard years, is taken from everything they have ever known and delivered into the hands of the most efficient killing machine humanity has ever created. Because that is where the curse truly begins. Imagine, if you can, what it must be like. You are a child. You might be an orphan of the Schola Progenium, one of the vast network of educational institutions where the sons and daughters of deceased Imperial servants are raised and trained for service to the Imperium. Your parents died in the Emperor's name, perhaps in battle, perhaps in some administrative capacity that ground them down until there was nothing left, and now you belong to the state. Or perhaps you are something different. Perhaps you come from a feral world, one of those savage planets where humanity has regressed to a primitive state, where survival depends on instinct and violence and the ability to read the land the way a scholar reads a book. Either way, you are young, you are alone, and you have been selected. While the selection process for the Officio Assassinorum is one of the most closely guarded secrets in the entire Imperium, and what little we know about it paints a picture of extraordinary brutality. Agents of the Officio, hidden among the populations of 1 million worlds, watch constantly for children who display the right qualities. Not just physical ability, though that matters. Not just intelligence, though that is essential. What they look for is something harder to define, a certain coldness, a certain detachment from the normal emotional bonds that connect human beings to one another. They look for children who can kill without flinching, who can endure pain without breaking, who can be alone without losing their minds. They look for the raw material from which an assassin can be shaped. When a suitable candidate is identified, they are taken. The methods vary. Sometimes the child is simply requisitioned from the Schola Progenium, plucked from among their peers with no explanation and no farewell. Sometimes agents of the Officio stage an accident or a raid, making the child's disappearance look like the work of pirates or natural disaster. Sometimes the child is simply there one day and gone the next, as if the universe itself has swallowed them whole. Regardless of the method, the result is the same. The child's old life is over. Their name, their history, their connections to family and friends, all of it is erased as thoroughly as if it had never existed. From this moment forward, they belong to the Officio Assassinorum, body and soul. The children are taken aboard special training ships, of vast vessels that prowl the space lanes between the outer worlds and Terra, serving as the first stage of a selection process that will claim the lives of the majority of those who enter it. Aboard these ships, the prospective assassins are subjected to a regimen of training that makes the brutal induction programs of the Space Marines look almost gentle by comparison. Days are spent battling with bone-wrenching exercise engines that push young bodies to their absolute breaking point. Deadly bouts pit candidate against candidate, with the losers often paying for their defeat with permanent injury or death. The instructors are merciless, judging every action, every reaction, every moment of hesitation or weakness, with eyes that have seen 1,000 recruits come and go. By the time the training ships reach Terra, as there may be only 1/10 of the original candidates remaining, sometimes there are even fewer. Occasionally, if the instructors deem every single recruit to be unworthy, the ships arrive with no candidates at all. The standards are that high. The margin for failure is that narrow, because the Officio Assassinorum does not produce mediocre killers. It produces perfection, or it produces nothing. Those who survive the journey are divided among the hidden temples of the Officio Assassinorum, sorted according to their aptitudes and the subtle qualities that make one candidate better suited for the Vindicare Temple's patient art of marksmanship, while another might thrive in the Callidus Temple's world of deception and shapeshifting. This sorting process is itself a closely guarded secret. But it is known that the assessors consider not just physical and mental capabilities, but deeper, more intangible qualities. A child who can endure absolute solitude for weeks without psychological deterioration might be directed toward the Vindicare. A child with an unusual gift for mimicry and social manipulation might find themselves in the Callidus. A child who radiates that strange, unsettling blankness that marks them as a psychic null will be taken by the Culexus, regardless of any other qualities they might possess. And then the real training begins. 10 years of intensive instruction await each candidate. 10 years during which every trace of their former identity is methodically stripped away and replaced with the skills, instincts, and mindset of a killer. They learn to fight with every weapon known to the Imperium, and many that are not. They learn to move through any environment without being detected. They learn to endure torture, to resist interrogation, to function under conditions that would drive an ordinary human being insane. Their bodies are enhanced with implants and augmentations specific to their temple, and they are trained to use these enhancements until they become as natural as breathing. But the physical training, as brutal as it is, may not be the cruelest aspect of an assassin's formation. The psychological conditioning is where the true cost of the profession becomes apparent. Imperial assassins are not soldiers who can rely on the camaraderie of their squad mates, the inspiring presence of a chaplain, or the righteous fury of shared purpose. They operate alone, and in the deepest shadows, cut off from all human contact except the cold, impersonal communications from their handlers. To prepare them for this existence, the temples systematically destroy their ability to form meaningful emotional connections with other human beings. The Vindicare Temple, for example, trains its agents to limit their vocabulary to only words that are useful for their profession. Think about that for a moment. Every word that describes love, friendship, beauty, joy, every term that human beings use to express their connection to one another and their appreciation for the world around them, all of it is excised from the assassin's mental dictionary. What remains is a stripped-down, functional language of targets and angles, distances and wind speeds, mission parameters and extraction protocols. As the Vindicare assassin does not just learn to shoot, they learn to become something less than human, a biological component of a weapon system that happens to have a heartbeat. The Callidus Temple takes a different approach to the same destructive end. Its agents are trained to become anyone, to wear another person's face and voice and mannerisms as easily as putting on a mask. But the cost of this incredible ability is that the assassin's own identity becomes increasingly unstable. When you spend years becoming other people, the question of who you actually are starts to become disturbingly difficult to answer. Callidus assassins who survive their first decade of service often find that they cannot maintain a consistent sense of self without chemical assistance, and that the polymorphine drug, which allows them to reshape their bodies, has created a dependency so profound that they need it simply to hold together the fragments of who they used to be. The Eversor Temple's approach is perhaps the most overtly cruel. Its candidates are surgically modified to accept a cocktail of combat drugs that would kill an ordinary human being several times over. Secondary hearts are implanted to keep them alive when the primary heart fails under the strain. Adrenal glands are enhanced beyond any natural limit, and the drugs themselves, a constantly changing mixture of stimulants, aggression enhancers, and psychotic rage inducers, are pumped into their systems until the candidates either adapt or die. Those who survive are no longer entirely human. They are living weapons, biological engines of destruction whose baseline state is a simmering psychotic fury that can only be kept in check by cryogenic freezing between missions. And the Culexus Temple does not create its agents through training at all, not in the way the other temples do. A Culexus assassin is born, not made, and the genetic mutation that makes them what they are is perhaps the cruelest curse of all. But we will get to that. We will get to all of it. Because each temple, each approach, each method of creating an Imperial assassin carries its own unique form of suffering, its own particular way of destroying the person who once existed and replacing them with something that the Imperium needs. And to understand the full scope of that suffering, we need to look at each temple in detail. Yes, starting with the one that most people think of first when they hear the words Imperial Assassin. The Vindicare Temple, the patient death, the perfect shot. Close your eyes and picture this. You are lying on the roof of a burned-out hab block, on a world whose name you were never told. You have been here for 17 days. You arrived in the dead of night, dropped from a shuttle that did not land, but merely slowed enough for you to roll out onto the rockcrete surface 3 stories above the street. Since then, you have not moved from your position except to relieve yourself into a sealed container and to eat the concentrated nutrient paste stored in cartridges built into the lower portion of your spy mask. You have not spoken to another human being. You have not heard a friendly voice, or you have not seen a single face that you could call an ally. You are alone, as you have always been alone, as you will always be alone. Your Exitus rifle lies beside you, a masterpiece of Imperial weapons smithing that was handcrafted by a magos artisan of the Adeptus Mechanicus specifically for you. It is part of a matched set, rifle and pistol, custom fitted to your body's exact specifications, and it will never jam, never overheat, never fail. The machine spirit that dwells within the weapon is sleek and murderous, a reflection of your own honed consciousness, and in your hands, the rifle has ended more lives than you care to count. Not that you count. Counting would imply that the deaths matter to you as individual events, and they do not. They are mission parameters. They are objectives completed. They are numbers on a report that you will never read because you are not the one who files reports. Through the advanced optics of your spy mask, you watch the target's compound. The mask scans across a wide spectrum, picking out heat and energy sources over long distances, and it allows you to monitor the enemy's communication channels. You know the target's schedule better than his own adjutants do. You know when he wakes, when he eats, when he meets with his co-conspirators, when he retires to his private chambers. You know the patrol patterns of his guards, the range of his defensive systems, the exact moment when the overlapping fields of fire from his automated turrets create a gap just wide enough for a single round to pass through. You have calculated this shot 1,000 times. You have factored in wind speed, and atmospheric density, the Coriolis effect of the planet's rotation, the thermal currents that rise from the industrial sector between your position and the compound. and the exact rate at which the heavy gravity alloy of your Exitus round will decelerate over the intervening distance. You have accounted for the target's personal force field, which your shield breaker round will pass through as if it were not there. You have identified the precise moment in the target's daily routine when he will be most exposed, standing in the open courtyard of his compound for exactly 4.7 seconds as he crosses from one building to another. That moment is in 3 days. You will wait. This is what it means to be a Vindicare assassin. Not the glamour of the impossible shot, not the satisfaction of watching a tyrant fall, and not even the grim pride of knowing that you have done what no one else could do. It is the waiting, the endless, soul-crushing, sanity-testing waiting, stretched across days and weeks and sometimes months, during which you lie perfectly still and perfectly silent, your body a machine and your mind a weapon, with nothing for company except the mechanical whisper of your life support systems and the slow, measured rhythm of your own breathing. And here is the thing that the stories never tell you about the Vindicare Temple. The older an assassin gets, the harder the waiting becomes, but not in the way you might expect. You see, the modifications that allow a Vindicare to maintain perfect stillness for impossible periods of time include neurological alterations that affect the agent's sleep patterns. Young Vindicare assassins can still sleep, though they rarely need to. But as the years pass and the modifications bed deeper into the neural architecture, sleep becomes increasingly difficult and eventually impossible. The older Vindicare assassins cannot sleep at all, even if they desperately wish to. They lie awake in the darkness between missions, their enhanced minds turning over every detail of every shot they have ever taken, unable to find the rest that their human brains still crave, even as their modified bodies reject it. Imagine that. Imagine lying in the dark, night after night, year after year, unable to close your eyes and drift away from the memories of all the people you have killed. Unable to escape into dreams, because dreams are a luxury that has been taken from you along with everything else. You can maintain perfect physical stillness for weeks at a time, but you cannot find a single moment of mental peace. The machine spirit in your rifle sleeps better than you do. The Vindicare Temple trains its agents to be unflinchingly loyal to the Imperium, but loyalty in this context does not mean the burning devotion of a space marine or the fanatical fervor of a battle sister. It means something colder, something more clinical. It means the absolute absence of hesitation. A Vindicare assassin will put a round through the skull of any target, regardless of who they are, without a moment's doubt. They have been conditioned to suppress every natural human instinct that might cause them to falter, every flicker of empathy or mercy or simple human curiosity about who their target was and what led them to this moment. The target is a set of coordinates, the bullet is a solution, and the Vindicare is the delivery mechanism. That is all. The weapons of the Vindicare Temple are as refined as the assassins who wield them. The Exitus rifle, the primary armament, is chambered to fire a variety of specialized ammunition types that allow the assassin to adapt to virtually any tactical situation. Standard rounds are constructed from heavy gravity alloys that can penetrate nearly all known forms of protection, dropping a Chaos Space Marine in full armor with a single well-placed shot. But the truly terrifying rounds are the specialized variants. Shield breaker rounds are treated with psychically charged imprints and contain anti-phase technology that allows them to pass through any protective energy shield, whether technological or warp-based in origin. Even the tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus do not fully understand how this technology works, but they know enough to replicate it, and that is sufficient for the Imperium's purposes. Turbo-penetrator rounds carry an internal mechanism that tears through a target's molecular structure after penetration, ensuring that even the most resilient biology cannot survive the impact. And Hellfire rounds contain a concentrated bioacidic compound that dissolves organic matter on contact, useful for eliminating targets whose biology might otherwise allow them to regenerate from a conventional wound. In one celebrated but carefully concealed engagement during the Lammas campaign, a massed Elder assault was halted by a single Vindicare assassin hiding in a ruined tower. Yet the alien advance toward the tower was stalled again and again by a hail of deadly sniper fire that picked off exarchs, warlocks, and support weapon crews in rapid succession. When the Eldar finally sent their scouts to clear the tower, they found it full of grenade traps, and the assassin was long gone. One individual, one rifle, and the entire momentum of an Eldar assault force was broken. Then, there is the case of the Vindicare assassin, Djedris Garamak, who waited in position for 6 years to eliminate the Dark Eldar pirate pilot, known as Skyknife. 6 years. Think about that. 6 years of absolute solitude, of stillness, of watching and waiting for the single moment when the target would be vulnerable. 6 years during which the assassin ate from sealed ration packs, drank recycled water, and maintained their weapon with the ritualistic devotion of a tech priest tending a sacred engine. And at the end of those 6 years, a single shot, and the target was dead. Mission complete. What kind of person can endure 6 years alone, in silence without losing their mind? The answer, of course, is that no normal person can. A Vindicare assassin is not a normal person. They have been modified, conditioned, and reshaped until the concept of loneliness no longer applies to them in the way it applies to you and me. But here is the question that haunts me whenever I think about the Vindicare Temple, the question that keeps me up at night in a way that the Vindicare themselves cannot be kept up, since they never sleep. Is the absence of loneliness the same as contentment? Or just because you have been conditioned to not suffer from isolation, does that mean you are happy? Or does it mean that yet another piece of your humanity has been cut away, leaving behind something that functions perfectly but experiences nothing? I think the answer is somewhere in the darkness between those two possibilities, and I think the assassins themselves, if they were capable of reflecting on such things, might agree. There was once a Vindicare assassin tasked with eliminating Cardinal Zafan on the shrine world of Vrax Prime, a mission that, had it succeeded, would have prevented one of the most devastating and protracted sieges in Imperial history. The assassin took position, made the calculations, waited for the perfect moment, and fired. The shot missed. Not because the assassin's skill was lacking, but because the cardinal was protected by the fervent prayers of his followers, a psychic shield generated by the sheer force of misguided faith that deflected the round at the last possible instant. What followed was several days of civil disorder that ultimately spiraled into the siege of Vrax, a conflict that lasted 17 years and consumed millions of lives. One missed shot, 17 years of war, millions dead, and somewhere, in the aftermath of that failure, a Vindicare assassin sat alone with the knowledge that they had not been good enough, that all their training, all their modifications, all the years of conditioning and practice and sacrifice had not been enough to prevent a catastrophe. We do not know what happened to that assassin. The records do not say. Perhaps they were given another mission, or another chance to prove their worth. Perhaps they were quietly retired, which in the Officio Assassinorum's parlance means something rather more permanent than a pension and a cottage in the country. What we do know is that the weight of that failure, the knowledge of what their missed shot had cost, would have been carried with them for every remaining day of their existence. Because a Vindicare never forgets. They cannot. It is not in their design. Now, I want you to take a breath. Let that settle for a moment. Because as terrible as the Vindicare's existence might sound, it is arguably the most straightforward, the most comprehensible form of suffering that the Officio Assassinorum inflicts upon its agents. The Vindicare at least retains their own face, their own body, their own sense of self, however diminished it might be. Yes, the assassins of the Callidus Temple do not even have that luxury. The Callidus Temple is built upon a single, extraordinary capability, the ability to become someone else. Not merely to disguise oneself, not to put on a costume or adopt an accent, but to physically, biologically transform into another person entirely. The key to this transformation is a drug called polymorphine, and the story of what that drug does to the people who use it is one of the most unsettling tales in the entire lore of the Imperium. Polymorphine is a shape-altering chemical compound that, when combined with years of specialized training and extensive surgical modification, allows a Callidus assassin to reshape their flesh at will.
And honestly, this is one of the things that makes me love this setting so much. Games Workshop could have made the assassins into these cool, edgy power fantasies where you just feel awesome about how deadly they are. But instead, the lore asks you to sit with the cost. It asks you to think about the kid who got pulled out of a schola progenium and never got to be a person. That tension between the grimdark spectacle and the genuine human tragedy underneath it is what keeps me coming back to 40K after all these years. The assassins are not just cool units on a tabletop, they are a mirror for some really uncomfortable questions about what we are willing to sacrifice for safety, and whether the people doing the sacrificing ever actually had a say in it. But anyways, let's just get back to the video.
Bones can be lengthened or shortened. Muscle mass can be redistributed. Her facial features can be molded like clay into a perfect replica of any humanoid target the assassin has studied. Even internal organs can be rearranged and modified to match the physiological profile of the person being impersonated. The result is not a disguise in any conventional sense of the word. It is a complete biological transformation, so thorough that even genetic scanning equipment can be fooled if the assassin is sufficiently skilled. The process of learning to use polymorphine takes years, and it is agonizing. The drug restructures the body at a fundamental level, reshaping bones, rearranging nerve endings, and altering tissues in ways that are excruciatingly painful. Early attempts to use polymorphine without proper training result in horrific mutations. As the body caught between two forms like a wax figure left too close to a flame, twisted into something that is neither the assassin's original appearance nor the intended target. Only through years of practice and surgical implantation of specialized flex cartilage and modified sin skin can a Callidus assassin achieve the kind of seamless transformation that their missions require. Over the centuries, the directors primus of the Callidus Temple have discovered that the female body and psyche is better able to implement the changes that polymorphine demands. The reasons for this are not entirely understood, but the result is that the vast majority of Callidus assassins are women, regardless of whether they are impersonating a male or female target. A Callidus assassin can become anyone, of any gender, of any approximate body type, and in some extraordinary cases, they can even impersonate members of humanoid alien species. There are confirmed reports of Callidus agents successfully passing as Eldar, and in at least one legendary case, an assassin named Mehlindi managed to impersonate a Genestealer hybrid, though this required additional surgery beyond what polymorphine alone could achieve. But here is the curse that comes with this incredible ability. When you spend years becoming other people, you begin to lose track of who you actually are. The longer a Callidus assassin serves, the more they rely on polymorphine, not just for their missions, but for their basic functioning. The drug creates a chemical dependency that goes far beyond mere addiction. After a decade or more of regular use, then many Callidus assassins find that they need polymorphine simply to maintain a consistent physical form. Without it, their bodies begin to shift and change on their own, the carefully implanted modifications destabilizing and causing the assassin's flesh to warp and flow in unpredictable and disturbing ways. They become, in a very literal sense, unable to be themselves without chemical assistance. And the psychological toll is even worse. There is a phenomenon within the Callidus Temple that is spoken of in hushed tones, acknowledged but never formally documented. It is called getting lost in character, and it is the occupational hazard that every Callidus assassin fears above all others. When you spend months or years living as another person, eating as they eat, sleeping as they sleep, speaking with their voice and thinking with their patterns of thought, the boundary between the assassin and the role begins to blur. Some agents report moments of genuine confusion about who they really are. Episodes where the personality of the target they are impersonating feels more real, more authentic than their own. In extreme cases, Callidus assassins have been known to fully adopt the identity of their targets, losing themselves so completely in the role that they forget they were ever anything else. This is not a metaphor. This is not a psychological abstraction. This is a documented phenomenon that the Callidus Temple's trainers and handlers have to actively guard against, and it represents perhaps the most insidious form of identity death in the entire Imperium. A space marine might lose his humanity through centuries of war and genetic modification, but he always knows who he is. His chapter, his battle brothers, his gene seed, these are anchors that keep him rooted in his identity. A Callidus assassin has no such anchors. They have only the mission, and when the mission requires them to become someone else, they become someone else so completely that the person they were before might as well not exist. Consider the case of Assaid Varanus, one of the most notorious rogue Callidus assassins in the Officio's history. Found by an inquisitor at the age of 12 on the world of Olympus, Assaid showed all the qualities that the Callidus Temple looked for: exceptional physical ability, superior intelligence, and an uncanny talent for mimicry that bordered on the supernatural. And she was given over to the Officio Assassinorum for testing and passed every physical assessment with ease. But there were doubts about her loyalty, doubts that the masters of the temple believed could be overcome through years of arduous training. They were wrong. Assaid was rebellious and selfish, qualities that no amount of conditioning could fully suppress. By the age of 17, it was likely that she would be quietly killed, deemed unsuitable for further training, despite having perfected many of the skills required of a Callidus and having begun to use polymorphine successfully. She was saved from execution only by the intervention of an inquisitor who saw potential in her defiance, and what followed was a career that took her far beyond the boundaries of the Officio Assassinorum's control. Assaid eventually went rogue, she operating as a freelance assassin who worked for anyone willing to pay, including aliens and subversive cults. The hyperpolymorphine that had been administered to her during her training granted her almost superhuman abilities, allowing her to alter her vocal cords and internal organs to match any subject, squeeze through pipes barely a foot wide, and push her unnatural body through grills and tiny windows. But the drug also created a dependency on stabilizing elixirs that she could only acquire by raiding Adeptus Mechanicus facilities, a dangerous hobby that left a trail for her pursuers to follow. Assaid's story is a cautionary tale about what happens when the Callidus Temple's process goes wrong, but it also illuminates the fundamental horror of what the process is designed to do even when it goes right. As Assaid broke free because some core of her original personality survived the conditioning process intact, but for every Assaid Varanus, there are thousands of Callidus assassins who did not break free, who were successfully transformed into perfect instruments of deception and death. And for those agents, the question of what remains of their original self is one that has no comfortable answer. Perhaps the most famous Callidus assassin of all time is Mishen, the woman who killed a Primarch. In the years following the Horus Heresy, the Night Lord's Legion continued to attack the Imperium under the command of their Primarch, Conrad Kurz, the Night Haunter. His campaign of genocide made the Legion's previous atrocities pale in comparison, and the Emperor himself, wishing to end the Night Lord's reign of terror forever, it dispatched half the Callidus Temple to terminate the renegade Primarch. Mishen was the one who succeeded, though the nature of her success is a matter of considerable debate. She infiltrated the Night Haunter's grotesque palace on the world of Tsagualsa, a structure built from still-living bodies, and made her way to his throne room. But when she arrived, she found no guards, no defenses, nothing between herself and the Primarch. Kurzi was waiting for her. He had foreseen her coming, had known about her presence from the moment her craft entered the eastern fringe, and he let her kill him. His last words to her were chilling in their certainty. He told her that her presence did not surprise him, that he had always known she was coming, and that her mission proved the truth of everything he had ever said or done. Yet he had punished those who had wronged humanity, he said, just as the Emperor now sought to punish him through her hand. And then the vidlog cuts out, and whatever happened next is known only to Meshen and the dead Primarch she left behind. Meshen cut off Kurz's head and took it as proof of her kill, along with many of his personal items, including the Corona Nox, the symbol of his authority. She declared herself the Godslayer as she fought her way past the Night Lord apothecary Talos Valkoran and managed to escape the planet. But the Night Haunter had foreseen her death as well, and he knew that his legion would not honor his final orders to let her go. They pursued her, and eventually the former Night Lord's apothecary caught up with her and ended her life with a brutality that was fitting for a son of Kurz. What strikes me about Meshen's story is not the act of killing a Primarch, extraordinary as that was. It is the way she was used and discarded. Half the Callidus Temple was sent against Kurz. Dozens of the Imperium's most carefully trained and modified agents, women who had sacrificed their identities and their humanity in service to the Emperor, were thrown at a target who they were never truly expected to defeat. Meshen succeeded because Kurz wanted to die, not because the Officio Assassinorum outmaneuvered a Primarch. And then she was left to die at the hands of his vengeful sons, with no extraction plan, no support, no acknowledgement of her sacrifice beyond a closed file in a vault on Terra. That is the life of a Callidus assassin. You become anyone, you go anywhere, you do whatever is required, and if you survive, you do it again. And again, and again, until one day you do not survive, and the only legacy you leave behind is a death card, that signature calling card of the Callidus Temple, a small card that, when touched, projects a holographic image of the victim's face in their moment of death, complete with a looped recording of their agonized screams. It is a warning, a statement, a declaration that the Emperor's justice can reach anyone, anywhere, at any time. But it is also, in a way that perhaps only the assassins themselves understand, a monument to the person who delivered that justice and was forgotten. There is another dimension to the Callidus experience that deserves attention, one that speaks to the fundamental loneliness of the shapeshifter's existence. Consider what it means to live among people who believe you are someone else. You eat meals with them, you share their jokes, you learn their fears, their hopes, the names of their children. You become, for all practical purposes, a member of their community, a trusted friend or advisor or loved one. And you do all of this knowing that at some point, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps in 6 months, you will destroy everything they believe about you by killing the person you were sent to eliminate. A Callidus assassin who infiltrates a planetary governor's court might spend months building relationships with the people who surround the target. Bonds are formed, however artificial they may be from the assassin's perspective. Trust is given. Confidences are shared. And then, when the moment comes, the assassin strikes. And everyone who thought they knew the person the assassin was pretending to be discovers that they never knew them at all. The betrayal is total and absolute, and while the assassin might tell themselves that these relationships were never real, that the people they deceived were merely obstacles or tools, the question lingers. After months of living as someone who laughed and cried and cared about the people around them, how much of that performance was actually a performance? The Callidus Temple's trainers acknowledge this problem in the most pragmatic way possible. They teach their agents that the mission is the only reality. Everything else, every relationship, every emotion, every moment of genuine human connection that might occur during an operation is nothing more than a tool in service to the mission objective. As the agent who allows themselves to be moved by the bonds they form during an infiltration is an agent who will hesitate at the critical moment. And hesitation in the Officio Assassinorum is fatal, not just for the agent, but for everyone who depends on the mission's success. But tools do not grieve for the roles they play, and human beings, no matter how extensively they have been modified and conditioned, are not tools. Somewhere beneath the polymorphine and the training and the psychological conditioning, there is still a person. A person who remembers what it felt like to be part of a community, however briefly. A person who, when the drugs wear off and the disguise is shed and they are alone again in the cold confines of their extraction vessel, might wonder what it would be like to stay, to actually be the person they were pretending to be, to stop killing and start living. But that is a fantasy that no Callidus assassin will ever be allowed to indulge. And that realization, the understanding that the closest you will ever come to genuine human connection is a lie you created in service to your mission, might be the cruelest aspect of the Callidus experience. You can become anyone, go anywhere, live any life you choose, but none of it is real. And the moment it starts to feel real is the moment you have to burn it all down. There are records, buried deep in the Callidus Temple's archives, of agents who refused to complete their missions because they had become too attached to the lives they were living undercover. These agents were not punished in any conventional sense. They were simply eliminated and replaced. That their polymorphine reshaped faces smoothed into new configurations, their bodies claimed by the temple for study, and their memories dismissed as cautionary tales. The officio does not tolerate attachment. It cannot afford to. And the agents who forget this lesson learn it again in the only way the officio knows how to teach, through destruction. The Callidus assassin carries weapons suited to their role as an infiltrator and close-quarters killer. The Satan phase blade, a piece of technology stolen from the ancient Necrons, is capable of cutting through any matter and any force field. It is a weapon of terrible elegance, a sword that respects no defense and acknowledges no barrier. The Neural Shredder, a short-range weapon that destroys synaptic patterns in sentient beings and short-circuits computer systems, as allows the assassin to disable multiple targets at once without leaving obvious signs of violence. And if all else fails, the poisoned needles that Callidus assassins habitually wear as hairpins provide a final, intimate means of dispatch. These are the tools of a profession that demands everything and offers nothing but the cold satisfaction of a mission completed. The Callidus assassin goes into the darkness wearing someone else's face, carrying weapons that defy the laws of nature, and possessing abilities that have cost them their very sense of self. And when they emerge, if they emerge, they return to a temple that will give them another face, another mission, another name to answer to, and the cycle begins again. Now, if the Vindicare represents the cold precision of Imperial assassination and the Callidus represents its deceptive art, then the Eversor Temple represents something else entirely, something that in many ways is the most honest expression of what the Officio Assassinorum truly is beneath its veneer of surgical precision and political necessity. The Eversor Temple represents rage, pure, unfiltered, chemical-fueled rage, distilled into a human body and pointed at the enemy like a loaded weapon. And the life of an Eversor assassin, if you can even call it a life, is perhaps the most horrifying thing I will describe to you tonight. The Eversor Temple does not recruit agents. It manufactures them. The process begins with a candidate who has already passed through the initial winnowing of the Officio Assassinorum's selection process. As a young person who has demonstrated exceptional physical resilience and a certain predisposition toward violence. From there, the transformation begins, and it is a transformation in the truest sense of the word. The person who enters the Eversor Temple's laboratories will bear no resemblance to the thing that eventually emerges. First comes the surgery. Extra organs are implanted to push the human body beyond its natural limits. A secondary heart, similar to those found in Space Marines, provides redundancy in case the primary heart fails under the incredible strain that the Eversor's body will be subjected to. Adrenal glands are enhanced to a degree that would be lethal in an unmodified human, capable of flooding the brain with enough stimulants to allow the assassin to function briefly even in hard vacuum. While the candidate's immune system is augmented to superhuman levels, not because the officio cares about the assassin's long-term health, but because without that augmented immune system, the combat drugs that define the Eversor's existence would kill them within hours. Because the drugs are where the true horror begins. The Eversor Temple has developed a cocktail of combat enhancement chemicals, a constantly changing mixture that includes substances with names like frenzon, Fury, Terminus, and Destroyer that are designed to push the assassin's bioengineered body to its absolute physical limit. These drugs do not merely enhance the assassin's speed and strength, they alter the assassin's state of mind, transforming a mere dislike of the enemy into a raging, all-consuming hatred, and the wish to serve the Imperium into suicidal determination. Under their influence, an Eversor assassin becomes something more than human and less than human at the same time. A whirlwind of violence that processes tactical data at lightning speed, while simultaneously losing all capacity for mercy, restraint, or self-preservation. And here is the curse that makes the Eversor's existence perhaps the most pitiful of all the assassin temples. The drugs are highly addictive. Not merely in the way that a recreational substance might be addictive, but in a fundamental, physiological sense. Without a constant supply of the combat drug cocktail, an Eversor assassin will die from the agonizing withdrawal symptoms. And even with the drugs, their lifespan is dramatically shortened. The chemicals burn through the assassin's body like acid through paper, destroying tissue even as the augmented immune system struggles to repair the damage. This means that Eversor assassins cannot be allowed to remain conscious between missions. They cannot be housed in barracks, cannot be given downtime, cannot be allowed to interact with other human beings in any normal capacity. Because an awake Eversor, even one who is not actively on a mission, exists in a state of barely contained psychotic fury that makes them dangerous to everyone and everything around them. The only way to keep them under control is to freeze them. Between missions, every Eversor assassin is kept in cryogenic stasis aboard specially designed starships and space stations hidden across the Imperium. Yes, they float in sealed chambers filled with super-chilled methylon gas, their bodies frozen, their minds blank, their existence reduced to a set of vital signs on a monitoring station tended by technicians called technologians, whose entire purpose in life is to keep the frozen killers alive and ready for deployment. These technologians live in a state of constant, low-grade terror. The facilities where the Eversors are stored are described in Imperial records as profoundly unsettling places. Vast hexagonal halls filled with stasis tubes that glow with a putrid green light. The barely human husks within them twitching occasionally despite being comatose, their augmentations active even in frozen sleep. When a mission is assigned, an Eversor assassin is transferred, still frozen, from their cryogenic crypt into a specially designed one-man drop pod. The assassin remains in stasis throughout the transfer, while cybernetic neurolinks within the pod feed mission details directly into their neural cortex. When the Eversor Temple's starship has reached the target system, the pod's automated systems begin the awakening process, gradually raising the assassin's body temperature while simultaneously flooding their system with the precise cocktail of combat drugs that the mission profile requires. By the time the drop pod reaches the surface of the target world, the Eversor assassin has fully awakened and been equipped to carry out the operation. But here is the detail that haunts me. Because of the use of cryosuspension, an Eversor assassin usually has no idea how much time has passed since they were last awake. They might have been frozen for a few months, or a few decades, or even centuries. The galaxy they wake up to might be fundamentally different from the one they last knew. The people they once served with, if they remember them at all, might have been dead for generations. An Eversor does not wake up gently. They wake up screaming, their bodies pumped full of chemicals that turn their world into a red-tinged landscape of targets and threats. Their minds so flooded with aggression that the concept of restraint literally does not exist for them. They are not given a briefing. They are not asked if they are ready. They are pointed at the target zone and released, and what follows is a hurricane of violence that does not end until every target is dead. The assassin receives a deactivation command from their handler, or the assassin themselves is killed. And even death does not stop an Eversor from killing. The sheer volume of volatile chemicals in their body means that when an Eversor assassin dies, when their brain or hearts cease to function, and their hyperactive immune system can no longer keep the toxic cocktail in check, the chemicals undergo a catastrophic reaction. The assassin's body explodes with enough force to destroy everything within a significant radius. This is not a malfunction. This is a feature. The bio-meltdown failsafe ensures that even in death, the Eversor serves the Emperor, taking as many enemies with them as possible in one final act of sanctioned destruction. Think about what that means for the person trapped inside that body. Assuming that some scrap of the original personality survives beneath the drugs and the conditioning, somewhere deep in the mind of every Eversor assassin, there is the knowledge that they are a bomb, that their body has been designed to self-destruct, and that this self-destruction is considered a feature rather than a flaw, that the institution they serve has built them with a kill switch that activates upon death, ensuring that even their final moments are not their own. There was a mission during the Taros campaign when Imperial forces were attempting to retake a mining world from the forces of the Tau Empire. After discovering the location of the Tau headquarters, the Imperial commanders requested the aid of the Officio Assassinorum through a priority message. An Eversor assassin was deployed in Operation Deathblow, tasked with eliminating the Tau commander and the Ethereal who was directing operations on the planet. The assassin's transport ship evaded the Tau blockade, delivered the stasis pod to the Imperial flagship, and the Eversor was dropped to the surface in a pod. The assassin successfully penetrated the Tau command center and detonated their bio-meltdown charge, destroying the facility and killing the Ethereal. But the primary target, the Tau commander, was outside the building at the time of the explosion, leading the defense against the Imperial attack. The mission was a partial success at best, a partial failure at worst, and the Eversor assassin was dead, their body reduced to component atoms by the violence of their own self-destruction. They had given everything, literally everything, and the result was incomplete. That is the fate of an Eversor assassin. You are frozen, you are awakened, you kill everything in sight, and then you die, either from enemy action or from the simple, inevitable failure of a body that was never designed to last. There is no retirement for an Eversor. There is no quiet end. There is only the ice and the fire, the cryogenic sleep and the chemical-fueled rage, cycling endlessly until the cycle breaks. What makes the Eversor's situation particularly disturbing is the question of consciousness during cryogenic storage. Imperial records are deliberately vague on this point, and the Eversor Temple itself refuses to comment. But there are hints, scattered through various accounts and testimonies from the technologians who tend the stasis chambers, and that suggests the Eversors may not be entirely unconscious during their frozen sleep. Some technologians report that the assassins' brains show low-level activity even in deep cryo, and that their augmentics twitch and pulse with a rhythm that suggests some form of dream state. Whether these dreams are true experiences or merely the random firing of drug-saturated neurons, no one can say. But the possibility that an Eversor assassin might spend decades or centuries trapped in a frozen nightmare, unable to wake, unable to move, unable to scream, experiencing some distorted echo of the rage that defines their waking existence, is a thought that should disturb anyone who considers themselves human. There are also the psychological implications of temporal displacement. When an Eversor is awakened for a mission, they have no frame of reference for how much time has passed. The galaxy they wake up to might be radically different from the one they last knew. Empires might have risen and fallen. Wars might have been fought and won and lost. Everyone the assassin ever knew, every face they might have remembered from their training days or their previous missions, could be centuries dead. This temporal disorientation is compounded by the combat drugs that flood the assassin's system upon awakening, making it effectively impossible for the Eversor to process the emotional implications of their situation, even if they were capable of doing so. In a very real sense, every Eversor assassin is a time traveler, catapulted forward through history with no control over their destination and no ability to return to the era they came from. They are relics of a past that no longer exists, awakened briefly to commit acts of extreme violence before being returned to the ice. If there is a more lonely existence in the entire galaxy, I cannot imagine what it would be. The combat itself, the brief periods of consciousness that punctuate the Eversor's frozen existence, is a blur of sensation and violence that barely qualifies as experience. The drugs that saturate the assassin system heighten every sense to an almost unbearable degree, while simultaneously obliterating higher cognitive functions like empathy, self-reflection, and moral reasoning. The Eversor does not choose to kill. They do not evaluate their targets or consider the consequences of their actions. They simply destroy, driven by a chemical imperative that reduces the complexity of human consciousness to a screaming directive. Annihilate everything that is not an ally. Imagine being trapped inside your own body while it moves with lethal purpose, your hands wielding weapons that you did not choose, your voice screaming sounds that you did not authorize, your every action dictated by a cocktail of chemicals that have hijacked your nervous system. Is there a you left in there, watching helplessly as your body tears through a room full of living beings? Or has the you been completely submerged, replaced by something that wears your flesh, but thinks with a different mind? The Officio Assassinorum does not care about the answer to this question. The Officio cares about results, and the results speak for themselves. Eversor assassins achieve kill ratios that would be impressive for a squad of Space Marines, and they do it alone, out with nothing but their augmented bodies and their drug-fueled fury. They are, by any objective measurement, the most efficient individual killing machines in the Imperium's arsenal. The fact that this efficiency comes at the cost of the agent's humanity is a price that the Officio has always been willing to pay. Another notable incident involving the Eversor Temple was the slaughter of Clan Mackenzie. The ruling family of a world called Dumb Roman 6 was financing pirate raids on neighboring mining worlds, using their political position to profit from stolen goods. When the Imperium discovered this treachery, they did not send a diplomatic envoy or a military force. They sent an Eversor. The assassin eliminated not just the Grand Duke, not just his immediate advisors, but the entire ruling clan, root and branch. Every member of the Mackenzie family who could be found was killed, their bodies left as a warning to anyone else who might consider betraying the Emperor's trust. This is the Eversor Temple's purpose distilled to its essence. It is not just assassination, it is annihilation, the complete and total destruction of a threat, not through precision, but through overwhelming, indiscriminate violence. And the agents who carry out this work are not soldiers making a choice to fight. They are victims of a process that stripped them of their free will and their humanity and turned them into living weapons that are stored in freezers between uses. If the Eversor Temple represents the destruction of the body and the Callidus Temple represents the destruction of identity, then the Culexus Temple represents something far more fundamental, something more existential. The destruction of the soul itself, or rather, the exploitation of its absence. A Culexus assassin is not made from a normal human being. They are born as something different, something that the rest of humanity instinctively fears and despises. They carry what is known as the pariah gene, an extraordinarily rare genetic mutation that occurs in perhaps one person out of a billion. This mutation means that the individual has no presence in the warp, the dimension of psychic energy that underlies all reality in the universe. In practical terms, this means they have no soul. Let that sink in for a moment. In a universe where the souls of the dead pass into the warp, where psychers draw power from its currents, or where the Emperor himself sits upon the golden throne as a beacon of psychic light guiding humanity through the darkness, a Culexus assassin exists as a void, a blank space, a hole in the fabric of reality that the warp flows around like water around a stone, and every living thing in the universe can feel that void, even if they cannot explain what they are feeling. To stand near a psychic blank, is to experience an indescribable sense of wrongness. Non-psychic humans feel uneasy, uncomfortable, unable to explain the irrational hostility that wells up inside them whenever they are in the presence of a blank. People develop an intense dislike, even hatred, for the blank, and they cannot articulate why. It is not a conscious response. It is something deeper, something instinctive, a warning signal from the subconscious mind that something fundamentally unnatural is nearby. For psychers, the experience is exponentially worse. Standing in the presence of a Culexus assassin is like staring into a bottomless pit, a yawning abyss where a soul should be. The psychic void that the Culexus radiates actively disrupts psychic abilities, shutting down the connection between the psyker and the warp, with the finality of a slamming door. For beings that are entirely psychic in nature, such as demons, a Culexus assassin is nearly invisible, a black hole in the sea of psychic energy that they use to perceive reality. They can sense that something is wrong, that there is a gap in their perception, but they cannot identify what it is or where it is. And by the time they figure it out, it is usually too late. Yes, the Culexus Temple takes these natural-born blanks and amplifies their abilities to terrifying levels. Their signature piece of equipment is the animus speculum, a device worn on the assassin's head that focuses their natural anti-psychic abilities into a concentrated weapon. The animus speculum absorbs excess warp energy from nearby psychers, energy that the psychers cannot efficiently use, and stores it. The Culexus assassin, unable to tap into the warp directly, uses this stored energy as ammunition, firing bolts of negative psychic energy that can obliterate the mind and spirit of an enemy psyker with devastating efficiency. The closer the Culexus gets to psychers, the more powerful the animus speculum becomes, creating a feedback loop of psychic destruction that makes the assassin more lethal the more powerful their opponents are. They also carry an Imperium, a device that induces enormous distortion and confusion in all nearby enemies, psychic or not. Combined with the natural aura of wrongness that the Culexus radiates, the Imperium makes the assassin nearly impossible to target, slipping through the enemy's perceptions like a ghost. And psych-out grenades, packed with the psychically negative dust that is created as a byproduct of the Emperor's golden throne itself, provide additional offensive capability against psychically sensitive targets. But the Culexus assassin's equipment, as impressive as it is secondary to the true curse of their existence, because a Culexus is not cursed by what was done to them. They are cursed by what they are, by what they have been from the moment they were born. Imagine being a child on an Imperial world, a normal world with normal people living normal lives. You are born, and from the very first day, something is wrong. Your mother cannot bear to hold you. Your father looks at you with an expression that is not love but revulsion, a revulsion he cannot explain or control. The other children refuse to play with you. Adults cross the street to avoid you. Local superstitions warn against touching you, saying that to do so would bring terrible luck. You are alone, always alone, surrounded by people who hate you for reasons that neither they nor you can understand. This is the childhood of a psychic blank. Before the Officio Assassinorum ever finds them, before they are ever trained or modified or equipped with the weapons of their trade, they have already lived a life of absolute rejection. Many blanks are cast out by their communities, are forced to live on the fringes of society like lepers in an ancient age. Some are killed by fearful neighbors who attribute all manner of misfortune to their presence. Others simply disappear, unable to survive alone in a universe that treats their very existence as an affront. When the Officio Assassinorum finds a blank, they do not rescue them. Let us be clear about that. They do not save the lost and lonely child and give them a purpose and a home. They take a person who has spent their entire life being despised and rejected, and they turn that despised and rejected person into a weapon. They take the very quality that made the blank an outcast, their absence of a soul, and they amplify it, enhance it, and point it at the enemies of the Imperium. The Culexus assassin goes from being rejected by everyone to being feared by everyone, and the distinction between rejection and fear, when it is all you have ever known, is not as meaningful as you might think. The location of the Culexus Temple is one of the most closely guarded secrets in the Imperium. It is said to be on a planet that orbits no sun, a world that exists in permanent darkness, beyond the reach of even the Astronomicon. This is fitting. The Culexus Temple hides in the darkness because the darkness is the only place where its agents can exist without causing suffering to those around them. Even the Aeldari, whose entire civilization is built upon psychic ability, fear the Culexus greatly. The Farseer Aladrios Kulcassian of Craftworld, Alaitok, once spent centuries trying to locate the Culexus Temple, coordinating a vast intelligence effort to find and destroy it. But when he used his precognitive powers to determine the consequences of the temple's destruction, he discovered to his horror that destroying the Culexus Temple would lead to the annihilation of his entire craft world. The temple was left standing, its agents continuing their terrible work, protected by the very paradox of their existence. Due to the nature of being born without a soul, combined with the social isolation that this condition inflicts from the earliest days of life, Culexus assassins struggle profoundly with social interaction. They can mimic the predictive patterns of human behavior well enough to pass as normal during a mission, playing a character as an actor might play a role. But whether they actually feel emotions, whether they experience anything resembling the inner life that other human beings take for granted, it is a question that no one has ever been able to answer definitively. Some scholars of the Officio believe that Culexus assassins are capable of a rudimentary emotional life, albeit one that is profoundly different from what psychically active beings experience. Others believe that the Culexus truly are soulless in every sense of the word, that the void where their soul should be extends to their inner experience as well, leaving them as empty within as they appear to others without. The truth, as with so many things in this universe, probably lies somewhere in between, but it is a cold comfort to a being who has never been held with affection, never been looked at without fear, and never been able to stand in a crowd without feeling the wave of instinctive hostility that their very nature provokes. Yet the Culexus assassin is the Imperium's ultimate anti-psycho weapon, a being of terrible power and strategic value. But they are also the loneliest creatures in the galaxy, and the silence that surrounds them is not the silence of peace, but the silence of the void itself. Beyond the four major temples that most people know, the Vindicare, the Callidus, the Eversor, and the Culexus, the Officio Assassinorum maintains additional orders that operate in even deeper shadows. The Venom Temple and the Vanus Temple may not have the dramatic reputation of their more famous counterparts, but their contributions to the Imperium's survival are no less significant, and the lives of their agents are no less cursed. The Venom Temple is perhaps the most elegant of the assassin orders, if such a word can be applied to an institution dedicated to murder. Its agents are masters of poison, trained in the creation and deployment of toxins so sophisticated that they can kill any target without leaving the slightest metabolic trace. A Venom assassin does not kick down doors or take shots from distant rooftops. They slip a compound into a drink, apply a substance to a surface that their target will touch, or deploy an airborne agent that will be inhaled without the victim ever knowing they are doomed. When a Venom assassin does their job well, the target simply dies, and the cause of death is listed as natural causes in every medical examination that follows. The Venom Temple selects its recruits from among the finest alchemists in the Imperium, in individuals with an intuitive understanding of biochemistry and a gift for creating exotic concoctions from the most unlikely ingredients. Their training involves not just the creation of poisons, but the development of delivery systems that are effectively undetectable. Toxin injectors that can be concealed in a ring or a piece of jewelry. Poisoned hook-fang blades that deliver their payload through the slightest scratch. Airborne compounds that can be released from a distance and carried to the target by natural air currents. During the Horus Heresy, The Venom clade was said to have had the greatest level of success among all the assassin temples, which tells you something about both the effectiveness of their methods and the chaos of the times. But when the galaxy was tearing itself apart and the traitor legions were wreaking havoc on a scale that defied comprehension, it was the quiet work of the poisoners that scored some of the most significant victories. Not the spectacular, headline-grabbing kills, but the quiet eliminations that removed key figures from the enemy's command structure without anyone ever knowing what had happened. The most famous Venom assassin in Imperial history is arguably Draken Vangarich himself, who rose from the ranks of the Venom Temple to become the 12th Grand Master of Assassins during the War of the Beast in the 32nd Millennium. But Vangarich's story belongs to a later chapter of our narrative. For now, it is enough to note that the Venom Temple, for all its elegance, demands the same sacrifice from its agents as every other order of the Officio Assassinorum. The Venom assassin must give up their identity, their connections, their very existence as a human being, in exchange for the ability to end lives so subtly that the universe barely notices the death. There is something particularly chilling about that, about the idea of a killer so skilled that their work is indistinguishable from fate itself. Then there is the Vanus Temple, and if the Venom represents the most elegant form of assassination, the Vanus represents the most intellectual. The agents of the Vanus Temple are called infocytes, and they are not killers in any conventional sense. They are information specialists, human computing engines of extraordinary capability, whose weapon is not the blade or the bullet, but data itself. At the Vanus Temple's dictum, the phrase that defines everything it does is this: the cleanest kill is one that another performs in your stead, with no knowledge of your incitement. This is assassination at its most pure, the complete removal of the assassin from the act of killing. A Vanus infocyte does not get their hands dirty. They gather intelligence, they analyze patterns, they identify vulnerabilities, and then they arrange circumstances so that the target is eliminated by someone else entirely, someone who has no idea that they are acting as a puppet of the Officio Assassinorum. Consider an example. A planetary governor has been embezzling funds from the Imperial tithe, diverting money to finance a private army that he intends to use in a bid for independence. A Vanus infocyte, or working from a secure location thousands of light years away, intercepts one of the governor's cash shipments and plants forged data bills among the genuine currency. When the governor's co-conspirators receive the shipment and discover what appears to be counterfeit money, they conclude that the governor has been cheating them. They murder him. The Officio Assassinorum's target is dead, and no one will ever know that the killing was orchestrated by an assassin who never came within a parsec of the victim. Infocytes are essentially human computing engines, trained from childhood to process vast volumes of information at speeds that would overwhelm an ordinary mind. They use predictive engines and prognostic simulations to calculate the probability of success for any given operation, and their insight in matters of strategy and tactics is said to be unparalleled. It has even been claimed that the Vanus Temple has never made an error in judgment, though some within the Officio itself consider this to be disinformation, a carefully cultivated legend designed to maintain the temple's mystique. The Vanus Temple also serves as the intelligence-gathering arm of the Officio Assassinorum, maintaining vast data stacks filled with information on every other temple, every assassin, every mission that has ever been conducted. This gives them an extraordinary degree of institutional power, because knowledge is the ultimate weapon, and the Vanus know everything. They maintain their position within the Officio, partly through competence, and partly through the implicit threat of blackmail. The unspoken understanding that if any other temple moves against them, the Vanus have enough dirt to bring the entire Officio crashing down. But the Vanus infocytes pay for their abilities with a form of obsession that borders on pathological. They are described as having the same relationship with raw information as an addict has with their chosen substance. They are enraptured by the idea of new data, consumed by the possibilities of what they might discover, and what they might do with that discovery. This is not a metaphor or a casual comparison. The Vanus Temple's training involves a process in which candidates are placed in a blank white room and given access to streams of raw data, which they must process and analyze until they literally collapse into a coma from mental exhaustion. Those who emerge from this ordeal with their cognitive abilities intact, or better yet, enhanced, are considered suitable for further training. Those who do not emerge at all are quietly disposed of. There is also the matter of the unbound infocyte, a rare designation within the Vanus Temple that transforms an already formidable analyst into something far more dangerous. An unbound infocyte is authorized to both select and execute their own targets, operating outside the normal chain of command. They identify a target, analyze the situation, develop a plan, and carry out the elimination, then immediately begin identifying the next target. This cycle continues until their unbound status is withdrawn, creating an autonomous killing machine guided by pure logic and data analysis. Yet the Vanus Temple's methods may lack the visceral impact of the other assassin orders, but their implications are in some ways more disturbing. Because when an Eversor kills, you see the blood. When a Vindicare fires, you hear the shot. When a Callidus strikes, you eventually realize that the person you trusted was never who you thought they were. But when a Vanus infocyte eliminates a target, you might never know that assassination was involved at all. You might go to your grave believing that the governor was killed by his own treacherous allies, that the rebel leader died in a tragic accident, that the demagogue choked on his own dinner. The Vanus Temple removes not just the target, but the very awareness that the Imperium had a hand in the killing.
They erase themselves from history so completely that even the concept of their involvement ceases to exist. And that, in its own way, is the cruelest curse of all, to be so good at what you do that no one will ever know you did it. The Horus Heresy, that cataclysmic civil war that nearly destroyed the Imperium in its infancy, was the crucible in which the Officio Assassinorum proved its worth and discovered its limitations. When the War Master Horus, the Emperor's most trusted son, turned against his father and plunged the galaxy into the bloodiest conflict in human history, the assassins were unleashed with a fury that matched the desperation of the times. And the stories of what they did and what was done to them reveal the terrible reality of what it means to be an instrument of last resort in a galaxy on fire. As the Officio Assassinorum dispatched 8 agents from across the 6 primary clades in an attempt to eliminate Horus before his rebellion could gain unstoppable momentum. 8 of the Imperium's finest killers, each one a master of their art, each one carrying the accumulated knowledge and training of their entire temple, sent against a single target. The War Master Horus, Primarch of the Lunar Wolves, arguably the greatest military commander in human history, the man who had conquered more worlds than any other being alive. They all failed. One by one, the assassins were detected, deflected, defeated, or destroyed. The last to make the attempt was Tobeld of the Venom clade, who managed to get closer to Horus than any of the others. Approaching the command tent of the War Master with a poison so subtle that it might have killed even a Primarch without leaving a trace. But Tobeld was discovered before he could deliver his payload, and the attempt ended in failure. The Vanus Temple's predictive engines calculated the probability of Tobeld's success at 0.2%, 2 chances in 1,000, and the Officio sent him anyway because 0.2% was better than 0, and in the desperate early days of the Heresy, any chance, no matter how slight, was worth taking. Tobeld died for that 2 in 1,000 chance. His sacrifice was recorded in the data crypts of the Millennium Temple and forgotten by everyone else. Following the failure of individual assassination attempts, a Malcador the Sigillite made a decision that had never been made before in the history of the Officio Assassinorum. He authorized the creation of the first execution force, a team of assassins drawn from multiple clades working together toward a single objective. The idea was radical because the temples had always operated independently, their agents trained to work alone and distrustful of any form of collaboration. But desperate times demanded desperate measures, and the Captain General of the Legio Custodes, Constantin Valdor, added his voice to Malcador's argument. The War Master had shown no qualms about violating the rules of war, Malcador reasoned. He had bombed his own warriors during the betrayal on Istvan III. No action was beyond the pale for Horus, and no response was too extreme for those who sought to stop him. 6 assassins were assembled for the mission, one from each of the primary clades, and they were sent to the world of Dagonet in pursuit of their target. The details of what happened on Dagonet are a subject of intense debate among Imperial scholars, partly because the Officio Assassinorum's records of the mission are heavily redacted, and partly because the surviving accounts contradict one another on several key points. What is known is that the mission ultimately failed. Horus survived, the heresy continued, and the galaxy burned. But the execution force concept survived, proving that assassins from different temples could work together effectively, even if the results of the first joint mission were not what anyone had hoped for. In the millennia that followed, execution forces became a standard, if extremely rare, tool in the Officio Assassinorum's arsenal, deployed only when a single assassin was deemed insufficient for the task at hand, and the stakes were high enough to justify the extraordinary risk and resource expenditure of deploying multiple agents simultaneously. The Horus heresy also saw the most famous assassination in Imperial history, the one I mentioned earlier in our discussion of the Callidus Temple, the killing of the Night Haunter, Conrad Kurzer, Primarch of the Night Lords, by the Callidus assassin Meshen. This single act, the only confirmed instance of a mortal human being killing one of the Emperor's 20 sons, cemented the reputation of the Officio Assassinorum as an organization that could reach anyone, anywhere, no matter how powerful they might be. But the heresy also revealed the Officio's greatest vulnerability. Yes, the assassins were scattered across the galaxy when the Civil War erupted, and many found themselves behind enemy lines, cut off from their handlers and their supply chains, forced to survive alone in a universe that had suddenly turned hostile. Some continued their missions, operating independently against traitor targets with whatever resources they could scavenge. Others were captured by the forces of chaos and subjected to torments that even their conditioning could not prepare them for. A few, it is whispered, were corrupted, turned by the dark powers of the warp into twisted reflections of what they had once been, their skills and their training used against the very Imperium they had sworn to protect. In the aftermath of the heresy, the Officio Assassinorum was reorganized under a new Grand Master, Khalid Hassan, who had been chosen by Malcador himself as his successor before the Regent of Terra's death during the defense of the Imperial Palace. Hassan inherited an organization that had been battered and depleted by the Civil War, its ranks thinned, its temples damaged, and its reputation both enhanced and complicated by the events of the heresy. The assassins had proven that they could strike at the highest levels of power, but they had also proven that even the most lethal killers in the galaxy could fail, and that failure had consequences measured in billions of lives. The centuries that followed the heresy saw the Officio Assassinorum become an integral part of the imperial power structure, its Grand Master sitting among the High Lords of Terra as a permanent member of the Senatorum Imperialis. This was a position of immense influence, and it was this influence that would eventually lead to one of the darkest chapters in the Officio's history. The story of Draken Vangorich is, in many ways, the story of the Officio Assassinorum taken to its logical extreme. What happens when the ultimate instrument of imperial justice decides that it knows better than the masters it serves? What happens when the Grand Master of Assassins looks at the High Lords of Terror and sees not the legitimate rulers of the Imperium, but a collection of incompetent, self-serving politicians whose bickering and cowardice threaten the very survival of humanity? Vangorich was the 12th Grand Master of Assassins, and he came from the Venom Temple, which gave him a perspective on the Officio that was different from what a Grand Master with a military background might have had. He was a political creature by nature and training, a man who understood the power of patience, the value of information, and the effectiveness of a well-placed poison. And when the War of the Beast erupted in the 32nd millennium, threatening to destroy everything the Imperium had built in the 10,000 years since its founding, Vangorich saw with perfect clarity the rot at the heart of the imperial government. The War of the Beast was a catastrophe of almost unimaginable proportions. A massive, greenskin horde, led by a warlord of unprecedented intelligence and resources, swept through imperial space with a ferocity that had not been seen since the heresy itself. Dozens of Space Marine chapters were annihilated. Thousands of worlds burned. The Imperial Fists, one of the most storied chapters in the Adeptus Astartes, all were reduced to a single surviving warrior. Terra itself was threatened, and the leaders of the Imperium, the High Lords who were supposed to coordinate the defense of humanity's domains, responded with incompetence and self-interest on a scale that beggared belief. Vangorich watched in growing disgust as the High Lords squabbled over political advantage while billions died. He watched as the Lord Commander Militant dithered over troop deployments. He watched as the Fabricator General of the Adeptus Mechanicus secretly hoarded alien technology for his own purposes, instead of sharing it with the forces that needed it most. He watched as the Ecclesiarch launched a disastrous proletarian crusade that was more about political theatre than military strategy. And slowly, methodically, with the patience of a true Venom assassin, yet he began to plan. His ally in this period was Slaughter Corland, the sole surviving Imperial Fist, who shared Vangorich's contempt for the High Lord's incompetence. Together with Assad Wire, a Venom assassin who had enhanced his own body with the biochemical expertise of his temple rather than using it solely for assassination, Vangorich worked to push the reluctant politicians toward action. He intimidated them. He manipulated them. He placed Callidus assassins among the bodyguards of those who resisted, a silent threat that needed no verbal explanation. He was, in every way, exactly what the Officio Assassinorum had trained him to be, a master of manipulation who could move the most powerful people in the galaxy like pieces on a regicide board. But the War of the Beast ground on, and the High Lords continued to fail. And eventually Vangorich reached his breaking point. The specific trigger was the discovery that Fabricator General Kubik had secretly teleported the Orc capital city aboard an Adeptus Mechanicus vessel, instead of carrying out the exterminatus that had been ordered, all in pursuit of alien technology. This act of spectacular self-interest, committed while billions of Imperial citizens were dying, was the final straw. Vangorich struck on a single day, in a coordinated operation that remains one of the most audacious acts of political violence in the history of the Imperium. In the space of a few hours, every one of the 12 High Lords of Terra was eliminated. The methods varied according to the target, showcasing the full range of the Officio Assassinorum's capabilities. But the Master of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica and the Master of the Astronomicon were both killed by the same Culexus assassin, their psychic defenses meaningless against a being who existed as a void in the warp. The speaker for the Chartist captains was goaded into suicide by an agent of Vangorich who had been planted as her aide. 2 High Lords were tricked into killing each other through the manipulations of a Callidus assassin who had replaced the Master of the Administratum himself. The Grand Provost Marshal of the Adeptus Arbites was killed by Assad Wire in person. Only 1 High Lord was spared. Vinand, the joint inquisitorial representative, was given an antidote to the poison that killed her colleague Veritas. The reasons for her survival were personal. It is implied that Vangorich harbored genuine romantic feelings for her. But they were also practical. Vangorich needed at least 1 legitimate member of the old regime to provide a veneer of continuity for his new government. This event came to be known as the Beheading, and it sent shockwaves through the Imperium that are still felt 10,000 years later. Vangorich installed puppet High Lords and took effective control of the Imperial government, ruling as the power behind the throne for the next century. And here is the genuinely complicated part of the story. For the first several decades, his rule was effective. Brutally authoritarian, yes, but effective. Terra was refortified. The fourth founding of Space Marines was successful. The Imperium's armies were rebuilt. The last remnants of the greenskin threat were hunted down and destroyed. Vangorich paid particular attention to the creation and sponsorship of the Death Watch, determined to ensure that no alien threat would ever again endanger humanity the way the War of the Beast had. But power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, even the Grand Master of Assassins. Over the decades, Vangorich's rightful concerns about the Imperium's safety curdled into paranoia, and paranoia gave way to madness. He began ordering random planetary purges, mass assassinations, and massacres with no strategic justification. He bankrupted entire subsectors to build grandiose monuments on Terra. He gave up any pretense of checks on his power, and the stability he had worked so hard to create began to crack under the weight of his tyranny. Eventually, the Imperium moved against him. A strike force of 400 Space Marines from the Imperial Fists, the Halo Brethren, and the Sable Swords was assembled to bring the Emperor's justice to the man who had once dispensed it so effectively. Vangorich retreated to the Eversor Temple at Terra's North Pole, and what followed was one of the most brutal engagements in the history of the Adeptus Astartes. 100 Eversor assassins stood between Vangorich and his would-be executioners. 400 Space Marines against 100 of the Officio's most devastating weapons. By the end of the battle, only 3 beings were still standing: Vangorich, Chapter Master Maximus Thane of the Imperial Fists, and a single Eversor assassin. Vangorich ordered the Eversor to finish Thane, but the assassin hesitated. It was a sad wire. The former Venom assassin, who had been converted into an Eversor as punishment for trying to kill Vangorich years earlier. Somehow, through sheer force of will, Wire had overcome his programming, refusing to kill the man who represented the legitimate authority of the Imperium. In that moment of distraction, Thane raised his bolt pistol. Vangorich, with the dark humor of a man who had spent his entire life dealing in death, asked if Thane would like to know the true story of how Conrad Kurz died. The answer was a single shot, and the 12th Grand Master of Assassins fell at last. The aftermath of the beheading reshaped the Officio Assassinorum in fundamental ways. The temples, which had previously been concentrated on Terra and its immediate surroundings, were scattered across the width and breadth of the galaxy. What this dispersal was a deliberate precaution, ensuring that if one temple fell to alien influence, demonic corruption, or simple heresy, the others would remain untainted. A new Ordo of the Inquisition, the Ordo Sicarius, was created specifically to monitor the Officio Assassinorum and prevent any future Grand Master from accumulating the kind of unchecked power that Vangorich had wielded. But the deeper legacy of the beheading is the question it raises about the nature of the Officio Assassinorum itself. Vangorich was not corrupted by chaos. He was not influenced by Xenos infiltrators. He was not mad from the beginning, not driven by personal ambition or petty grievance. He was a patriot who genuinely believed that the High Lords were failing the Imperium. And he was right. The High Lords were failing the Imperium. Their incompetence during the War of the Beast nearly led to the extinction of humanity. Vangorich acted because no one else would, and for decades his actions produced results that justified the terrible cost. The question is this: if the weapon you create to protect humanity can turn on its masters and seize control of the entire Imperium, was it ever really under control in the first place? And if it was not, what does that say about the relationship between the assassins and the civilization they serve? The beheading is not just a historical event, it is a warning, carved into the institutional memory of the Officio Assassinorum and the Inquisition alike, that the deadliest weapon in the Imperium's arsenal is also the most dangerous. The ripple effects of the beheading extended far beyond the political sphere. In the decades and centuries that followed Vangorich's fall, the Officio Assassinorum underwent a period of profound self-examination and restructuring. The temples that had once operated in close proximity on Terra were scattered to hidden locations across the galaxy, each one isolated from the others by immense distances and layers of bureaucratic compartmentalization. The intent was clear: never again would a single individual be able to seize control of all the temples simultaneously. Never again would the Officio function as a unified power that could threaten the Imperium's ruling body. But the dispersal of the temples also changed the nature of the assassin's experience. Previously, agents had at least the theoretical possibility of contact with members of other temples, a slim thread of connection to a community of individuals who understood their unique circumstances. After the dispersal, each temple became an isolated enclave, its agents cut off not only from the outside world, but from their counterparts in other orders. The loneliness that had always defined the assassin's existence became even more absolute. The walls of their prison thickened by the very reforms that were supposed to make the Officio safer. The history of Imperial assassination is punctuated by moments of both triumph and tragedy that illuminate the complex moral calculus at the heart of the Officio's mission. In the 37th Millennium, a Vindicare assassin was deployed against Cardinal Jerome the Unsaintly, who had attempted to secede from the Imperium, taking an entire subsector with him. The assassin's shot was clean, as the cardinal fell, and the secession collapsed within weeks. Millions of lives were saved by a single round from an Exitus rifle. But who mourned the cardinal's followers, the people who had genuinely believed that secession was their only hope for a better life? The Officio Assassinorum does not ask these questions. It cannot afford to. In the 38th Millennium, a Callidus assassin was deployed against a rebellious lord on the world of Orlenza Triartis. Instead of killing the lord directly, the assassin infiltrated his inner circle by replacing his chief military advisor, gradually steering the rebellion toward positions that ensured its failure. The lord was eventually overthrown by his own followers, who never knew that the voice advising them had belonged to a shape-shifting killer from the far side of the galaxy. And it was a masterful operation, a perfect expression of the Callidus Temple's art. But what of the military advisor who was killed and replaced? What of their family, their friends, the people who waited for them to come home and never understood why they did not? Perhaps the most darkly humorous entry in the Officio's record is the mission of the Callidus assassin Milizia Scarvelli, who managed to impersonate a Gretchen, one of the small, subservient greenskins that served the larger orcs as servants and laborers, in order to infiltrate the workshop of Big Mech Oil Guzla. Scarvelli used polymorphine and surgical modification to shrink her body to the size of a Gretchen, altered her features to resemble the greenskin species, and spent weeks living among the orcs before striking at her target. The mission was successful, but the sheer physical toll of maintaining a non-human form for that long left Scarvelli with permanent damage to her skeletal structure that even the Callidus Temple's advanced medical facilities could not fully repair. And then there is the case that haunts the Vindicare Temple to this day. In the 39th Millennium, the Vindicare assassin, Degedris Garamach, was assigned to eliminate a Dark Elder pirate pilot known as Skyknife. I mentioned this mission earlier, but it deserves further examination, because the 6-year wait that Garamach endured is not just a testament to the Vindicare's patience. It is a window into the psychological abyss that opens when a human being is asked to put their entire existence on hold for half a decade, reduced to nothing but a finger on a trigger and an eye behind a scope. For 6 years. And Garamach lived in a single location, eating the same concentrated nutrient paste, breathing the same recycled air, staring through the same optics at the same patch of sky where Skyknife's vessel might eventually appear. 6 years of complete solitude. 6 years of maintaining peak physical and mental readiness for a moment that might never come. 6 years during which the assassin's only companion was the machine spirit of the Exitus rifle and the quiet hum of the spy mask's life support systems. What goes through a mind during 6 years of stillness? We know that Vindicare assassins are conditioned to endure extreme isolation, their emotional responses dampened to the point where loneliness is no longer experienced as suffering. But dampened is not the same as eliminated. Somewhere in the recesses of Garamach's modified brain, some remnant of the person they had been before the temple took them must have stirred. Some ghost of a memory, some echo of a feeling, some whisper from the child who had once known what it was like to be held, to be spoken to be acknowledged as a living being, rather than a component of a weapon system. When Skyknife finally appeared, and Garamach took the shot, the mission was over in a fraction of a second. 6 years of waiting, and the culmination was a trigger pull that lasted less time than a heartbeat. And then Garamach was extracted, debriefed, and returned to the temple to await the next mission. There was no celebration, no recognition of the extraordinary endurance that the mission had required. Just the next set of coordinates, the next target's dossier, and the next stretch of endless, silent waiting.
Up we have walked together through the founding of the Officio Assassinorum, through the stolen childhoods and broken identities of its agents, through the specific horrors of each major temple, through the fires of the Horus Heresy and the darkness of the Beheading. But there is one more aspect of the Imperial Assassin's existence that we have not yet explored, and it is perhaps the most chilling of all. Because all the suffering we have discussed so far, the training, the modifications, the psychological destruction, the missions, the killing, all of it leads to a single, inescapable conclusion. There is no way out. An Imperial assassin cannot retire. The concept does not exist within the Officio Assassinorum's operational framework. An agent who is no longer fit for active duty is not given a pension and a quiet life on a peaceful world.
Yet they know too much. They have seen too much. Their very existence is a security risk that the Officio cannot tolerate. The most common fate of an aging or disabled assassin is a quiet death at the hands of their own organization, administered with the same clinical efficiency that they once directed at the enemies of the Imperium. Some Lord Assassins, the most senior and experienced agents, are elevated to administrative roles within the Officio, spending their remaining years planning operations, training new recruits, and watching over the younger assassins from behind the safety of a desk. But even these individuals remain prisoners of the organization that created them. They live within the Officio's facilities, cut off from the outside world, all their entire existence confined to the narrow boundaries of the institution that has defined them since childhood. For the Eversor assassins, the question of retirement is academic. They are frozen between missions and awakened only to kill. Their existence is a cycle of ice and fire that continues until their bodies finally give out under the strain of the combat drugs, or until they are killed in action. There is no after for an Eversor, no future to look forward to, no accumulated wisdom to share with the next generation. There is only the mission and the freeze and the mission again. For the Culexus, retirement is equally meaningless. Where would they go? What would they do? The very quality that makes them valuable to the Officio, their psychic blankness, makes them intolerable to every other human being in the galaxy. And a retired Culexus would be a pariah among pariahs, a creature that could not exist in normal society without causing distress to everyone around them. The temple is the only home they have ever known, and it is the only home they will ever have. And for those rare assassins who try to leave, who attempt to break free of the Officio's control and build some semblance of a normal life, the consequences are swift and merciless. We have already discussed the case of Assaid Varanus, the rogue Callidus assassin who escaped the Officio and operated as a freelance killer. She spent the rest of her life on the run, constantly looking over her shoulder, knowing that the organization that had created her would never stop hunting her. And her case is far from unique. The Officio Assassinorum does not tolerate desertion, defection, or disobedience. And its agents are property, not people, and property does not have the right to walk away. There is also the troubling case of the Warhammer Temple, a seventh assassin order that was created in an attempt to develop agents capable of dealing with multiple targets simultaneously. The Warhammer Temple experimented with illegal human, mutant, and xenos hybrids to create assassins who could absorb the biomass of their victims and rapidly evolve new biological weapons on the fly. These creatures were intended to be the ultimate multi-target elimination tools, capable of adapting to any threat and destroying entire command structures in a single operation. The Mairoris experiment went catastrophically wrong. The creatures produced by the temple were so unstable, so dangerous, and so difficult to control that the entire order had to be destroyed. The Mairoris Temple is now extinct, its facilities demolished, its records purged, and its surviving creations hunted down and eliminated. But the fact that the experiment was attempted at all reveals something important about the institutional mindset of the Officio Assassinorum. In the pursuit of more effective killing, there is no line that the Officio will not cross, no ethical boundary that it will not violate, no form of suffering that it will not inflict upon the human beings, or the things that were once human beings, who serve as its instruments. The Ordo Sicarius, the branch of the Inquisition charged with watching the Watchers, was created in the aftermath of the Wars of Vindication that followed the beheading, when a renegade Callidus assassin named Cés Jarek attempted to assassinate the Grand Master of Assassins. As after a series of terrible atrocities within the Imperial Palace itself, the Inquisition established the Ordo Sicarius to ensure that the Officio Assassinorum could never again threaten the stability of the Imperium from within. The Ordo monitors the activities of every temple, every agent, every mission, and its mere existence serves as a reminder that even the most powerful killers in the galaxy answer to a higher authority. But the Ordo Sicarius also raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of the Imperium itself. Who watches the Watchers who watch the Watchers? The Inquisition monitors the Officio Assassinorum, but who monitors the Inquisition? The High Lords of Terror authorize the deployment of assassins, but who ensures that the High Lords themselves are not corrupted by the knowledge that they can order the death of anyone in the galaxy with a single word? The system of checks and balances that governs the Officio Assassinorum is built on a foundation of mutual suspicion and institutional paranoia, and while it has prevented another beheading for the past 9,000 years, one cannot help but wonder how many smaller abuses have slipped through the cracks. It is worth pausing here to consider the sheer scale of the Officio Assassinorum's operations across the breadth of the Imperium. For every assassin that is deployed on a mission, thousands of clerks and bureaucrats oversee the logistical work that makes that deployment possible. These officials determine where the operatives should go, who they should kill, and how their equipment is produced and maintained. They are part of a vast administrative machine that processes intelligence reports, authorizes kill orders, tracks the movements of targets across dozens of sectors, and ensures that the right assassin with the right skills arrives at the right location at the right time. These non-assassin employees live entirely within the organization and have no contact with the outside world. They are as much prisoners of the Officio as the assassins themselves, bound by oaths of secrecy that are enforced with the same finality as any other directive from the Grand Master. Astropaths, navigators, intelligence operatives, weapons technicians, medical specialists, all of them spend their entire lives within the closed ecosystem of the Officio Assassinorum, or serving the organization's needs and sharing its secrets. When they die, their bodies are cremated and their ashes scattered in accordance with protocols that ensure no trace of their existence can ever be recovered. They are ghosts who serve ghosts, and the institution that employs them considers this arrangement not just acceptable, but optimal. The relationship between the Officio Assassinorum and the Space Marines is another subject worthy of discussion, because it reveals the cultural fault lines that run through the Imperium's warrior class. Space Marines, owing to their codes of conduct and their warrior nature, find assassination distasteful. They will avoid any contact with assassins under most circumstances, viewing the covert killing of individuals as fundamentally incompatible with the martial honor that defines their existence. A Space Marine faces his enemies head-on, with bolter and blade, announcing his presence and challenging his foes to stand and fight. The idea of hiding in the shadows and killing from concealment is anathema to everything the Adeptus Astartes represents. This cultural divide has practical consequences. When an assassin is deployed to support an Imperial force that includes Space Marines, the assassin operates independently, never joining any squad or formation. The Marines know that the assassin is there, but they prefer not to acknowledge the fact, treating the covert operative as something shameful, a necessary evil that they would rather not think about. It is a relationship defined by mutual necessity and mutual discomfort, and it speaks to the fundamental tension at the heart of the Imperium's approach to war. The Space Marines represent the Imperium's ideal, the noble warrior fighting for a righteous cause. The assassins represent the Imperium's reality, the cold-blooded pragmatism that keeps the ideal alive. There is also the matter of the Officio Assassinorum's relationship with alien technology and forbidden science. The temples use many exotic types of equipment that push the boundaries of what Imperial law considers acceptable. Sinskin, a substance that once sprayed onto the body, forms a black outer skin that protects the wearer from the environment and enhances physical strength, is standard issue for many assassin types. But beyond Sinskin, the temples maintain secret vaults of forbidden and alien weapons, giving their agents access to some of the most advanced technology in the galaxy. The Callidus Temple's phase blade, forged from technology stolen from the ancient Necrons, is perhaps the most dramatic example, but it is far from the only one. This willingness to use alien technology sets the Officio Assassinorum apart from virtually every other Imperial institution. The Adeptus Mechanicus would consider the use of Xenos technology to be tech heresy of the highest order. The Inquisition's Ordo Xenos would normally condemn anyone who traffics in alien artifacts. But the Officio operates under a different set of rules, protected by the authority of the High Lords and the practical necessity of its mission. When the alternative is the death of billions and the loss of entire sectors to the enemies of the Imperium, the origin of the weapon matters less than its effectiveness. This pragmatic approach extends to the Officio's treatment of its own agents. The temples view their assassins not as individuals with rights and dignity, but as components of a weapon system that must be maintained, calibrated, and deployed with maximum efficiency. When a component fails, it is replaced. When a component becomes obsolete, it is discarded. The emotional and psychological well-being of the individual agent is of no concern to the institution, except insofar as it affects operational performance. An assassin who is psychologically stable is more effective than one who is not, so the temples invest in psychological conditioning. But the goal of that conditioning is not the agent's well-being. It is the mission's success. This institutional mindset creates a profound dehumanization that pervades every aspect of the assassin's existence. They are referred to by designations rather than names, identified by their temple and their mission parameters rather than by any personal characteristics. Their training strips away individuality and replaces it with standardized skill sets. Their bodies are modified not to enhance their human experience, but to optimize their function as killing machines. And when their function is no longer required, they are disposed of with the same casual efficiency that the Adeptus Mechanicus applies to a servitor that has outlived its usefulness. The modern Officio Assassinorum are operating in the aftermath of the Great Rift, and the return of the Primarch Robert Guilliman faces challenges that its founders could never have anticipated. The galaxy is divided in two. The Astronomican's light is blocked across vast swaths of Imperial space. Entire sectors have been cut off from Terra, left to fend for themselves against threats that multiply daily. In this environment, the demand for the Officio's services has never been higher, and the pressure on its agents has never been more intense. Guilliman's return has also changed the political dynamics surrounding the Officio. As Lord Regent, Guilliman has the authority to sanction assassinations directly, bypassing the traditional requirement for High Lord's approval. This streamlining of the authorization process has made the Officio more responsive, but it has also raised concerns about the potential for overuse. When the barrier to deployment is lowered, the temptation to reach for the assassin's blade rather than the diplomat's pen becomes correspondingly greater. The question of whether the Officio Assassinorum will continue to serve the Imperium or eventually become another threat to it is one that haunts every Grand Master who takes the office. The precedent of Vangorich looms large in the institutional memory, a constant reminder that the weapon can turn in the hand. The Ordo Sicarius watches, the Temple's scheme, the Assassin's kill, and the great machine of Imperial statecraft grinds on, powered by the blood and suffering of individuals who will never be acknowledged, never be thanked, and never be free. Under Imperial and Mechanicus law, the improper activation of a member of the Officio Assassinorum is considered treason of the highest order. This means that the deployment of an assassin is, at least in theory, one of the most carefully controlled and heavily scrutinized acts that the Imperial government can authorize. Only the High Lords of Terror, or since the return of Reboot Guilliman, the Lord Regent, can sanction the deployment of an Imperial assassin. But in practice, the full scope of the Officio's operations may never be truly known. The very secrecy that makes the organization effective also makes it impossible to audit completely, and the Vanus Temple's habit of maintaining blackmail material on everyone, including its fellow temples and the Inquisition itself. Kint suggests that the Officio Assassinorum is far more autonomous than the official chain of command would imply. And so, as we come to the end of our journey through the cursed life of an Imperial assassin, I want to leave you with a thought about sacrifice and purpose and the terrible things that are done in the name of survival. The Imperium of man is not a kind civilization. It is not a just civilization. It is a civilization that has survived for 10,000 years by doing whatever is necessary, no matter how cruel, no matter how destructive, no matter how morally repugnant, to ensure the continued existence of the human species. The Imperial assassins are perhaps the purest expression of this survival at any cost philosophy. They are human beings who have been stripped of everything that makes life worth living. Their names, their identities, their relationships, their freedom, their very sense of self, and turned into instruments of state-sanctioned murder. They have been given incredible abilities and incredible power, but the price they pay for that power is everything else. And the worst part, the part that really keeps me up at night, is that it works. The Officio Assassinorum, for all its cruelty and all its horrors, is effective. The governors who might have rebelled think twice when they remember the stories of predecessors who died choking on their own wine at a state banquet. The heretics who might have spread their corruption to an entire sector are silenced before their words can take root. The alien warlords who might have united their forces against the Imperium are found dead in their own strongholds, are killed by weapons that no one can identify and techniques that no one can replicate. These assassins preserve the Imperium not through the grand, visible acts of heroism that the Space Marines are celebrated for, but through the small, invisible acts of violence that prevent those grand acts from becoming necessary. They are the immune system of the Imperium, targeting threats before they can metastasize, and the human cost of this service is borne entirely by the agents themselves. No one mourns a dead assassin. No one erects a monument to their sacrifice. No one even knows their name. There is a phrase that the Officio Assassinorum uses, a phrase that captures the essence of what it means to serve in its ranks. The motto of the organization, et inscribed in the foundations of every temple and whispered by every agent before they embark on their mission. For those that defy the Imperium, only the Emperor can judge your crimes. Only in death can you receive the Emperor's judgment. But what the motto does not say, what it deliberately omits, is that the Emperor's judgment falls not only on those who defy the Imperium, but also on those who serve it. The assassins are judged too, judged by their effectiveness, by their obedience, by their willingness to sacrifice everything for a cause that will never acknowledge their contribution. And in the end,
when the last mission is complete and the last target has fallen, the judgment that awaits them is the same as the judgment they delivered to so many others. Silence, darkness, and the cold comfort of knowing that somewhere in the galaxy, because of what they did, because of what they gave up, because of the person they destroyed to become the weapon the Imperium needed, someone is alive who would not otherwise be. Someone is free. Someone is safe. That is the cursed life of an Imperial assassin. That is the price of the Emperor's peace. And now, after walking with me through these shadows, after hearing about the stolen children and the broken souls and the terrible things that are done in the name of humanity's survival, I hope you have a deeper appreciation for the dark corners of this universe that we love to explore together. The Imperium is a place of infinite complexity and infinite horror, and the Officio Assassinorum is just one thread in its vast and terrible history. But it is a thread that, and once you pull on it, reveals truths about the nature of sacrifice, duty, and the cost of survival that are relevant not just in the grim darkness of the far future, but in any age and any place where people are asked to give up pieces of themselves for the greater good. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the cursed existence of the Imperial Assassins, please consider dropping a like on this video and subscribing to the channel. It really does help more than you know, and it allows me to keep making content like this for all of you. If you have thoughts, theories, or stories about the Officio Assassinorum that I did not cover, drop them in the comments below. I read every single one, and who knows, your insight might inspire a future video. Until next time, stay safe out there. And remember, whilst in the grim darkness of the far future, the most dangerous weapon is not the one you can see. It is the one that has already been pointed at you, by hands that were once a child's, in service to a god who will never know their name. The Emperor protects.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.